What's the connection between religious people, atheist psychologists, and the most effective change strategy you probably never heard of? I know. Today, we're diving into the counterintuitive science of willpower with somebody who's devoted his entire career to figuring out why some people really succeed at change and why some people fail terribly. It's not about motivation, it's not about commitment, it's not even about having a really good reason to change. It's about something simpler and weirder. Once you get it, you'll never look at organizational transformation in the same way again. So, do you have the willpower to stick around and find out what's next? I'm Michael Bungay-Stanier. This is Change Signal. This is the podcast where we cut through the noise and the blather and the BS to find the good stuff that works in change and transformation. Now, we're doing something new today. We're releasing 2 episodes at the same time. This is a mini episode with Roy Baumeister, and I'll introduce him to you more fully in just a moment. But suffice to say, he's been described by Dr. Tasha Eurich as one of the absolute rock stars of psychology. And it just so happens that the other episode released today is with Tasha. So this is a great combination. Look, one of the hardest questions I know in this space of individual and organizational change is this: how do you give another person more agency? Because you can't just give it to them. That's an act that's kind of totally counter to the whole idea of agency. It almost disempowers them. So you have to find a way to invite them in, to call them forth, to encourage them, to nudge them into taking what one of my favorite authors, Peter Block, would call greater responsibility for their own freedom. Now, to have any chance of this, you have to understand willpower. And for 15 years now, I've had a book on my bookshelves by that name, Willpower, by Roy Baumeister. Roy's a social psychologist, he's a professor of psychology, and he's devoted, as he puts it, to trying to understand the human mind and the human condition. So this is a short episode, and we're wrestling with some of the core questions about willpower and individual change. Where best to start with change? Which comes first, attitude change or behavior change? And what's the role in surrender in behavior change? Roy, welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
I know you're in Utah at the moment, but I also know that you've been in Brisbane for the last few years. So you're going to have this perfect combination of North American perception and Australian laconicness. It's going to be ideal. For somebody who hasn't thought much about willpower, and you're kind of summarizing your core idea, going, look, here's actually how you deploy and think about willpower. What's your most recent thinking or most recent articulation of what people need to know about willpower for themselves?
You have a limited stock of willpower that's used for all the same things.
Right.
So each time you spend some willpower doing one, you make it less likely that you'll succeed at the others. And start with the easiest. Start with the easiest change because the self-control is like a muscle. So as you exercise it, you get stronger and you get better. One of my former PhD students, Mark Maraven, he had some work with people trying to quit smoking. And that's the graveyard of psychological theories. Hardly anything works. But he had people just practice to strengthen their self-control for a couple of weeks with simple things like breaking, if you're right-handed and you have the habit of opening the door with your right hand, well, use your left hand instead.
Right.
Just little things like that. And he tripled the success rate of people quitting smoking, which is very impressive.
Is there something about a first step in behavior change or shifting habits that you've discovered helps sustain willpower or makes a difference to the likelihood of success?
Well, I've been working with an expert on behavior change, Nathalie André, is a professor in France. And she says that many of the experts on behavior change have long assumed that you have to start by changing people's attitudes. And her strong impression, which is backed up by a fair amount of data, is that, well, change the behavior first. The changing the attitudes isn't often enough, and whether it's in a clinical practice or in organizational procedures stuff, you get the changes started. And then often the attitudes will come around for it. Particularly, she's talking about clinical patients and so on, and getting them to think differently. Okay, that's nice, but get them to stop doing the things that are causing trouble. Do that first, and then work on the attitudes.
That is interesting. I mean, I've actually said to the people I work with, the body often leads the brain
Right.
rather than the other way around, which is like,
yes.
if you want to behave, if you want to do something in a certain way, put your body in the state of what that's like.
Yes.
Is there anything I could be doing if I'm leading change? Part of the inherent challenge of change is it has conflict at its heart. In some ways, there's a core conflict between the status quo and the imagined future state, and there's a conflict in just between, like, this is the way I've always behaved and the way I understand the world and the certainty that I have with it, and uncertainty and disruption. Not to mention kind of losing jobs or gaining new responsibilities. So it is, if not conflict exactly, there's a lot of tension and uncertainty and some of the attributes of conflict in change. If I'm trying to lead change in this organization, is there anything I can be doing to help the people who I'm hoping will change to boost their willpower?
So we found that uncertainty itself seems to produce effects that look like ego depletion, like your willpower is down. Our thinking is it doesn't exactly use up the willpower in the same way that resisting temptation does, but it serves as a cue to conserve. And the depletion effects, you usually don't go till you're out of willpower. You never get down to zero. But as with your physical energy, the body starts conserving. You go for a long run even. You don't run full blast until you're exhausted and fall down face first. But rather your body starts pacing itself and conserving energy. And there's research even with animals that when there's uncertainty in the environment, they start conserving food. They even fatten up if that's the only way they conserve food.
Yeah.
And so that's what we see we've done many experiments showing this effect that when people go through a situation that has uncertainty in it, that makes them act like their willpower is depleted. And we think now that they still have the willpower, but they're just conserving it, which will look the same to your organization and your boss and your superiors.
Right.
But so anything that can be done to reduce the uncertainty, make people feel secure in their jobs at least, or that it's not going to be that difficult, or it's only going to be a particular period of time, and then it will happen. That would probably help as well.
One of the sections I thought was particularly fascinating in your willpower book was the chapter on Alcoholics Anonymous, where you talk about Eric Clapton and others, is this idea of surrender to a higher power. And in the book you intimate, and I'm not sure if this is still true, that you're an atheist, and I too am an atheist. So this whole idea of surrendering to a higher power feels counter-philosophical in how I frame the world. And also surrender feels like a counterintuitive thing to be doing to try and increase willpower.
Right, yes.
What's the tension or what the dance between those two things?
Well, that's a big, fascinating problem. I think we don't fully understand it yet, but religious people do have better self-control. We don't know exactly why. There are several theories. One is the sense that God is watching you. That makes you more aware, so you know when you're doing something you shouldn't do.
Right.
There's the community aspect. Religious people kind of look out for each other, and they don't let them go too far off the rails.
Yeah.
There's even building up willpower, the exercises of praying every day, or reading the Bible, or getting dressed and going to church. All those things are willpower exercises that can, again, strengthen the muscle. So for those of us, and scientifically, religion is a human activity, and yet the results, you're doing it yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that the higher power actually comes in and helps the person in Alcoholics Anonymous avoid having a beer. It may help him to believe that.
Right.
It is still your own willpower that is ultimately getting it done. At least that's the way we would look at it in scientific psychology.
Is there something about willpower that I should have asked you, but I haven't yet? Any kind of core insight that you're like, I wish I'd been able to share that?
From the point of view of the organizational leader, trying to get people to expend their willpower, adjusting to new procedures, doing it in a positive spirit. There's some surrounded with positive things, even a small gift or a break to enjoy something humor. That might help people be more willing to exert themselves for the change as well, and that could be useful.
Roy, for people who want to learn more about you and your work, is there a place they can find you?
I have a website, roybaumeister.com.
Perfect. Roy, it's been a delight talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
I have a Zen koan for you. If no one changes their behavior as a result of your intervention, was there even an intervention? I'm not sure if this is the sound of one hand clapping or maybe a tree falling in a forest. But either way, you've got to figure out the way to shift people's behavior in and amongst all the other things you're doing as a change leader. So this will pair nicely with Tasha Urich's interview that dropped today. And you might also want to go back and listen to one of the very first pod interviews, number 2 on the list. That was with Professor Katie Milkman. Wonderful conversation, full of practical insights about changing behavior. Thanks for doing the work. I'm glad you're here.